You're listening to Real Investor Radio with Craig Fuhr and Jack BeVier, where we cover advanced real estate investing topics to help you stay ahead of the curve in your real estate investing business. All right, well, welcome everyone to Real Investor Radio. I'm back with Jack BeVier. Jack, how are you today?
Doing great, man. Good morning. Great to see you.
I'm Craig Fuhr, and we're going to introduce our guest in just one second. Jack, we were talking earlier in January, I believe it was, about software that the Dominion Group has used to scale over time. And I'm so excited to talk today with our guests coming on because we're going to dive deep into data and but talk. I would just say to folks who are listening to the show, haven't had a chance yet to check out all the episodes. I would go back to the episode where Jack and I were talking about various types of software that Dominion has used over the years, Jack, to grow the business, to get better, to scale. So yeah, speak to that for a second.
Yeah, sure. So we've been, I always have tried to dive really deep into whatever, into anything that we're doing from a data point of view, from a software point of view, always trying to use the best tools and products that were available. So I've always kind of, added myself to every newsletter and clicked on every Housing Wire link to hear about the new product announcement. And I think that's been a really big help for us. So early in, one of the things that I got really into as was probably in the early 2010s, the National Assessor and Recorder data for public records, everything started to go online, right? Before that, you could go to maybe your state had a website where you could look up public records data, but they started to scan in everything where you could actually search documents in most states. And then it's just every year been incrementally improved. And out of that period of time, there's really three companies that it was Black Knight, CoreLogic, and now it's Atom that has the third license, or that are really the three data providers for the assessor and recorder data nationally. And they've got this oligopoly, right? That those three companies are the source data if you want to get all of the real estate data put together. And as data science became more and more popular, those more and more companies kind of started to realize the power that having the access to all of that data, could offer. Right. And that idea really attracted my attention from an early stage. So one of the first things we did was I was like, hey, we wanted to lend money to fix and flip investors. And so I want to see every time that there's a flip. And I called up the data providers, and those two, it was Black Knight and CoreLogic at the time, and they didn't know it. They thought I was speaking Greek as far as they were concerned.
I'm sure they were excited to hear from you.
Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, I was tiny, right? I wasn't a major mortgage company. They didn't do small licenses. They certainly didn't do custom queries. If they did, it was like, hey, we'll charge you hundreds of thousands of dollars to even touch our database. So that wasn't going to fly. And I found this company, Land Vision, which I'm hoping to get on as a guest. It's a really cool data science company. And they were kind of just small enough that they'd write a query for me. So I said, hey, I want you to tell me every time that an entity buys a property and then resells it. I just chose an arbitrary time frame of within 12-month period, and the difference between the purchase price and the sale price of that property is at least $60,000. Because I wanted to draw the distinction between wholesales and flips, which even today, the Atom data doesn't draw that distinction. When they give the flipper report, they're including all the wholesaler data in there. They just say if a property was sold, bought and then resold, even if it was for $10,000 more, they call that a flip. I'm like, well, that's completely.
And so you had to So you had to Frankenstein together a list based on, was it purchased in January and then sold in March? Was it purchased for $100,000 and then sold for $250,000? And from that, you were able to surmise, yeah, that was probably a flip.
Yeah, I was compiling it manually myself back in 2012, 13. And I was spending a lot of time doing it, but it was a super valuable list, right? Like it's everyone I wanted to talk to. It's everyone that I thought was, really interesting. That was cool, right?
Yeah.
And so I got Land Vision to cut me that query. And then so we started sending that list back in 2014. And that's like, frankly, like one of the main ways that we grew 10 years ago was through that specific use of unique data. I'm giving you a very long preamble, but I promise there's a point here somewhere. So it was like that specific use of like, targeted data became to me an incredibly low cost of acquisition of a customer, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
I was then able to send direct mail to flippers before anyone was. And we had a super low cost of acquisition of a customer doing that.
Well, that was when you were still working an hourly wage too, Jack. That was pretty low.
That's
so,
true.
like
I still am. Yeah. And so I just fell in love, like with that experiment. Like I was like, it was an idea. And then I went and found the company to write the query for us. It wasn't cheap, but it was, oh my God, so worth it.
So
that
valuable.
Like I just fell in love with the idea of how, like, applying ideas to this data set could produce incredibly high returns on investment. And really kind of like, ramp up, make your marketing like highly effective, highly profitable, right? And so
Jack, at the time, were you still looking for something that was very local?
So I was doing it myself in Maryland, but then when we as a lending company started to lend outside of Maryland, some states didn't have data that was quite as good as Maryland. I didn't want to have to learn all these new databases. I was just frankly spending a ton of energy and time just cutting these lists on nights and weekends myself because they were worth it, but they were like very labor intensive to do that. So I started like trying to explore the data science space and figure out like which companies were really kind of early movers in that space. And so I went to a mastermind and would mention some of these ideas. And I met Chris Richter, who is one of the founders of Audantic, works with Eli. And he was the first guy who I started, like, when I started talking to him at the bar about data stuff, like listening to him talk, I'm like, this guy freaking gets it. Like we were two nerds in a pod, right? And we just talked about data science, and like he was way ahead of me from a technical point of view. And I thought it was just the coolest thing ever.
Way ahead of his time as well. Way ahead of his time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Way ahead of his time. But I was like the business guy who he was just like, yeah, exactly. I don't understand why all these knuckleheads don't get it. Like, yes, like clearly, there's clearly a use case here, right? Like, yeah, tell me I'm not taking crazy pills. And so we really hit it off. And so we've been working with Audantic. That super long preamble is to tell you how, why I think this is so cool, why I think this is such a high value add for our listeners, is that we've been working with Audantic since then. And following the company, watching their development of now a lot of different products. It's almost become, they've also got now like kind of a software platform to help you really, a business intelligence tool, which I think is just incredible. And so we'll dig into all that stuff, but wanted to give the preamble as to why we thought, I was so excited to get Eli from Audantic on the podcast today. So thanks.
Well, Eli, welcome to the show. That was a long preamble indeed. I was, but Jack knows. Just having some fun here, Jack. Eli, welcome to the show. Eli Fisher, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about the company, and we'll jump in.
Absolutely, guys. Well, thank you, Craig and Jack. Appreciate you guys, and thank you for the kind words, Jack. I'm Eli Fisher. I oversee licensing here at Audantic. A little bit about me. I've been in the tech space 20 years. A lot of startup battles here. And it's just kind of what I do. My original background, I come from cattle ranching family. So, growing up in Montana, I learned a quick lesson here during calving season. If you work around cows, you end up smelling like cow. And so I did not want to be a rancher. So I wanted to do anything other than that. And so I started out my career in the medical industry, basically going in, working with orthopedic surgeons, going in, covering case. And the ironic part about it is, I look at this industry, a lot of fix and flip guys we work with, the surgeons that I worked with basically called it glorified carpentry because, a lot of the tools that we use to build a house, we use to fix people. There's awls, nails. It's just a different application, but it's the same, mechanical concepts. And so after I left the medical industry, I was part of a startup in Kansas City, and then I moved back out here to Washington. I've known Chris for over 20 years. And, at the time I moved back out here, Chris had said, hey, I've built this company right here. I'm looking to probably scale out the sales function. You've been in sales your whole life. You love data. Why don't you come be a part of it? And I joined the company a little over 5 years ago. And then so when we look at what Audantic does today, we try and make data actionable for people. There's a lot of data that's out there, and it's highly commoditized in that I like to let investors know that everybody pretty much has access to the same data. If you ever see a guy on YouTube talking about, the secret data, the special data, generally that lives in the corner with the leprechaun and unicorn. It doesn't exist, and so if everybody really has access to the same data, that does not mean you know how to make that data actionable. And that's where we really come in and fill the gap of saying, look, in any given market, there are only so many properties that are actually going to trade off market to an investor. Here's how you focus on who those best people are. So we really look at it from a revenue optimization standpoint for not only the marketing aspect, but also the internal revenue funnel. Because one of the curious things that we see is that a majority of loss that occurs within any customer's revenue funnel generally happens within the follow-up stages. And we can actually quantify that so that they can start converting at a higher level without even spending any more money. It's just asking a better question relative to the data that they have.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk more about the approach and how you guys target and use predictive modeling. But one of the things that every investor, Jack, either young, old, experienced, not experienced. Obviously, our podcast is geared towards advanced investors, but we all need data, and there's no lack of it, no lack of providers out there now, Jack. It's I remember when I used to go out to the Register of Wills site in Maryland, Jack, and it's just a big long list that comes out. Actually, the list is updated, I think, daily, if I'm not mistaken, but there's no way to download that data. And so I went out and I found a really smart VA, I think in India, and I paid him to write me a macro. Did I ever tell you this, Jack?
Yeah. I paid
him to write me this killer macro that would log into the Register of Wills site, go to Baltimore County, let's say, download all of that data, Eli, and it would put it perfectly formatted into a spreadsheet for me that I could then go send to like a Go Big Printing or something like that to print off my letters for him. And it was seamless. I mean, it was perfect. The problem with it was, Eli, is that it was so I would do several counties in Maryland, include Baltimore City as well. And so, per month there might be, I don't know how many people die, so it was probably like 700, say it's 500 to 700 letters a month that I would send out. And as you know, it's a very profitable list for many people, probate marketing. Everyone does it now, right? Mm-hmm. Back then, not so many. However, what I learned along the way was, geez, there's just a lot of people there's just a lot of folks who there's no house as part of the estate. And then a lot of these people just aren't going to sell to me. And I'm all for shotgun marketing and throwing as much stuff up against the wall as I can. And back then it was very inexpensive to do. But I would love to talk about a much more targeted approach for better investors. And I'm sure that's what Audantic is all about.
Yeah, Craig, you bring up a lot of great points. And so, if we think about kind of the life cycle of how most investors approach data, typically what I will see is people will start off with niche lists. And by niche, what I mean is they'll go and they'll pull, like to your point, the probate list or, affidavit of death. There's a cute term out there now, pre-probate. That's the one thing I do see in this industry is there's a lot of made up terms.
Is that like I'm about to die, but I'm not sure I'm dying yet?
I think the intimation there is that it's basically, it's like, before the probate process has started, but it's a made up term. It's like, I don't know what that means. Affidavit of death is actually a defined thing. And so You have these made up terms, but when we look at a lot of these niche categories, whether it be pre-foreclosure, what have you, that data is pretty good for the most part because you know the inherent motivation of the individual. If you see somebody that's in a pre-foreclosure situation, the government says you're moving, you are probably moving. Now, the downside of that is when you actually look at a distribution of product that trades off market to investors, those niche categories only make up a very, very small percentage because, to your point, there's not necessarily a lot of it. Okay. And then that challenge is then compounded by the fact of that everybody and their dog, the second something gets published to the public notice stage, it's the equivalent of shooting a flare gun off in the sky and say, hey, investor, come talk to me. And so usually it's the first person to engage that's going to win that deal. And so if you think about it, it becomes very, very hard to have a scalable, repeatable model only relying on that data. And so then you kind of look at kind of the next step, the evolution that we would see people do. And this is where people started stacking data. And on the surface, it makes sense. It's not a bad approach either. So you will see people go to, the batches, the prop streams, the atoms of the world. And it's pretty similar to what people pull. They'll pull the high equity list. They'll stack it against absentee. And then they'll layer on a couple of other things. And that's not a bad approach either. You will certainly get deals that way. But it becomes problematic because you're making some universal assumptions. You're assuming that because this individual has equity and because this individual also is an absentee owner, that is a good target. Sure. And sure, in some cases, that person will sell to an investor, but the vast majority of those individuals will never, ever sell to an investor. And so when you consider that, there's this inherent waste of all these investors are targeting the same people because they're using essentially the same stack. And they're just basically throwing money after it over and over again to people that will never sell to them. And it's highly inefficient. Sure. And that's where we really step in to try and solve that problem by using predictive models to indicate who has the highest likelihood to transact off market to an investor, but also the class of investor as well.
Yeah, I think that's, you mentioned class. I truly think that's the class of your product. And so maybe you can just dive in about predictive modeling at this point, exactly what it is and how you all use it.
Yeah. So, when you talk about what do we do, everybody and their dog, ever since they learned to play Chat GPT, is an AI expert. We've been doing predictive modeling for the last 8 years. And if you really want to boil it down as to what it is we do, we just do math at scale. We do large scale statistical analysis. And so what is our predictive modeling, which is a type of AI? What does it actually do? Well, every day we monitor, ingest, clean, and standardize and house every single real estate transaction across the country. And really, what does the algorithm do? Well, it looks at, say, in a specific area, here's all the people that traded on market. Here's all the people that traded to an investor. And then the data, basically, the algorithm is looking and saying, okay, those people that have historically sold to an investor, what do they look like from a persona standpoint? What does the product specifically look like? And then through large-scale statistical analysis, or often what we refer to as backtesting, we basically are able to say, okay, these are the individuals based on the historic performance in any given market that have the highest likelihood based on the person and the product to sell off market at a discount to a specific class of investor. And when
Eli,
I talk about,
let me interrupt you real quick because I want to. You get there's a ton right in that 30 seconds right there, and I really want to labor the point a bit because it's where people sometimes miss that this is so interesting. We're all normal, just normal, right? Normal investors. We generally come to this space with this hypothesis that people who are going to sell to investors at a discount or who have problems that we have an opportunity to solve, right? A reason for us to get a deal, right, on the property itself, that there's some thesis behind that distress. And then we go look for the indicators of that distress. And that's smart, right? Like that's better than just, knocking on random doors or
I was about to say the same exact thing.
Blasting an entire zip code. Like it's not a bad place to start. But the problem is that now everyone's doing it, right? Like back in 2013, 14, that was good enough But by 2017, 18, that was no longer good enough, right? Like everyone's doing that. And now in the market, the market's gotten super saturated from that point where, as you pointed out, there's no special list. There's no special like corner of public records that people can't find. So there's no such thing as as the market is more efficient than it ever has been before. There's no such thing as getting a single look at a deal, right? Like you're one of 4 appointments, best case scenario, generally, even when you're sending direct mail, particularly on these lists. On these lists where people are looking for indicators of distress. So we're always looking for the indicators of distress and then hoping that there's a deal that's somewhere in there. What you guys are doing is starting from the other end. You're saying, let's go look at everyone who sold to an investor last month. And so these are deals that we're not going to go get, right? Like generally, this is stuff that I'm not even paying attention to. Mm-hmm. Normal investors not even paying attention to. Let me see everybody who sold to an investor, and that the price that we think that based off of an AVM, an automated valuation model, that price looks cheap, right? Like looks lower than what that, it looks like that house needs some work. Probably, it's $100,000 sale in a 225 neighborhood. And so rather than, and let's go find out what the people who are selling to investors, where they are, who they are. Mm-hmm. And so you guys are adding all these other lists, all these other indicators that are non-distressed necessarily indicators, right? They're just demographic, psychographic, lists. There's the whole data industry is a whole thing, right? Like you can get lists of magazines that people buy, all kinds of stuff. And so you guys are laying on those kind of things to look for other markers in the probable sellers category, and then saying, okay, here's what different categories of probable sellers are. Let's now apply those same filters to everyone who still owns property. And let's go try to find people who may not be on a pre-foreclosure list. No one's, there's no affidavit of death. There's no like estate open. There's no recent non-consideration transfer. But those people get put on your list so that hopefully we as an investor are now spending our marketing dollars on a warmer list that is probably also that is hopefully also less competitive, because it doesn't necessarily have those classic distress indicators attached to it. And so you're then more likely, the thesis is we are then more likely to get a less competitive situation, to get a less competitive situation, and that we are honing our marketing dollars in on a smaller subset so that we can hit that list harder. And that was something that really took me a second to like wrap my brain around, is like, the point is to there's, you've got 1 million people in a particular metro. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's 100,000 that, that are high equity and, that would fall into like, some classic list criteria. But you guys are going to narrow it down to 15 or 20,000, and we should hit that 3 times as hard, right? And you will, as a result, have a higher conversion rate on our marketing dollar because we've narrowed the list down. We think we're doing something. We think that there's something intelligent about our list that other people are missing, and we're spending more money on those less competitive but still eligible leads. And to me, and that's the thesis, is that even after paying for this service, that a return on our marketing dollar is going to be better than if we had just cut a list on batch, cut a list on PropStream.
Yeah,
fair. Did I summarize that? Okay.
Yeah. I think
one thing I would just say to that is everyone has access, Eli, to Jack was just saying back in 2012, you could easily find the access of sales data. This house should be worth this, but it sold for this, and that's the easy stuff. There's some sort of indicator of distress. I think what I'm most interested in is, how do you guys go back and look at sort of all of that data and then layer on additional variables that show motivation?
Yeah. So I think when you look specifically at what the algorithm is doing, And I'll give you a case study here. So there's a property that was in Richmond, Virginia, and you go back to 2021. And essentially, the algorithm identifies this target and says, hey, this guy here, there's something going on in his life. He's going to sell to an investor. Now, at that snapshot in time, there's no deed transfers. The property is owner occupied. There's no liens against him. There's no pre-foreclosure file. There is nothing on the surface other than the fact that this property has equity that would tell an investor to go after it. And yet the algorithm says, hey, go after this guy, and it classified it as the highest projected ROI target in that area. So how does it do that? Well, when we look at what the algorithm is doing, it's going in and it's looking at all the people that have historically sold to an investor. And to Jack's point, we're looking at the demographics and socioeconomic standards of these individuals. Mm-hmm. Because as much as I would love to tell you that, people wake up and say, oh, you know what? Yeah, Craig, Jack, today I thought I would be a pre-foreclosure. I just arbitrarily made that decision. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? If you think about it, that is the end state that this person has wound up in, meaning they had to go through a lot of things in their life to get to that point. Mm-hmm. So really what the algorithm is doing is it's looking for those underlying markers that are going on in that person's life that says, hey, this individual has a high likelihood to sell to an investor based on the historic precedent of these other individuals that have gone through similar life scenarios that ultimately sell to an investor. So if you really want to look at it from an overly simplistic standpoint, let's just say you have two individuals that own a property. And let's talk about these individuals, okay? So you got individual A. Well, what does this person do for a living? Well, individual A is a CPA. What does his Friday night look like? Well, he typically comes home on a Friday night. He's opening up a bottle of Woodford Reserve Double Oak. He's turning on CNBC, and he's watching Kramer scream about the market on Mad Money. That's individual A, who owns a house, right? Now compare that to individual B here. What does this guy do for a living? Well, this guy hangs sheetrock for 14 hours a day. What does his Friday night look like? Well, his habits are basically he stops off at 7-Eleven, picking up a couple tall boys, pack of smokes. He doesn't have a 401k or multiple IRAs like Mr. CPA over here. So what does his retirement planning look like? Well, he's buying scratch-off tickets and Powerball because let's be honest, man, somebody's got to win, right? And then his evening looks like this. He goes home and he's watching TMZ and pro wrestling. One of those individuals stands a significantly higher chance of selling off-market at a discount to an investor. And so when we talk about the demographics and socioeconomic data that we look at, that is the type of data that we ingest. Sometimes it's referred to as the creepy data. But the reality of it is that type of data is just a commodity these days. Anybody can go out and buy that, as scary as it sounds. The key here is gleaning statistical significance from that data, because you can have all of that data and you can make some very, very bad assumptions. And that's why what the algorithm is doing is it is running simulations at scale to say, okay, here's all these different factors. Here are the people that have historically sold. We're going to look at those factors and then almost build a lookalike audience in Baltimore and say, okay, based on the historic precedent, here are all the individuals that meet that criteria that are not in those stages that we look at historically from a pre-foreclosure, an affidavit of death. We may only see that they have, high equity, but we know that they will eventually wind up at that point. And so the competitive advantages we can give to our clients and say, hey, look, based upon the data, you really need to focus on this specific group of targets. To Jack's point, maybe it's 20,000, but it's the 20,000 best that have the highest likelihood to sell off market at a discount. So as we bring that full circle, I shared with you that case study from Virginia, where the algorithm identified that individual had no markers except for the fact that had high equity, yet the algorithm knew. Well, if you play that guy's story out, what happened is eventually he did go into pre-foreclosure. And then we saw an investor pick up the property at 50 cents on the dollar, slaps it on the MLS after doing a little paint and carpet, and ripped 137K in under 2 months. So that is what the goal of the algorithm is doing, is it's identifying those people before they've hit those known distressor stages that everybody and their dog looks for, but it can also quantify, and we call this in statistics, front loading of a data set, meaning we put the very, very best people that have the highest potential yield in the front of the data set so that not only can the client focus on the best available target, but also the people that will yield the most of a return.
Brilliant. So with the availability of data these days, we can just go off on this tangent for a little bit. With the availability of data, and I assume it's it's coming down in price for you guys to aggregate all this data. My wonder is, when will more competitors pop up to what you're doing? Obviously, it feels to me like you guys have been doing it a while. You're doing it well, but I have to imagine that there's a lot of other companies out there who are saying, "Oh, we know the kind of the standard sets that everybody's used. How do we layer on what Audantic is doing to, provide a lower cost solution?" Right? And everything becomes commoditized over time.
Yeah. I think when you look specifically as to what we do, there's a level of technical sophistication that is required to truly accomplish building predictive models. And so the reality of it is to actually hire data scientists and data engineers just to manage and be able to build these types of models that are truly effective, do back testing. That is a very, very special skill set.
Yeah.
So you look at the companies that actually service and have the ability to do that. They look at basically, let's call it what we're in, a niche vertical. And the total addressable market for them is tiny. So for people that have that skill set and ability, this isn't really on their radar because there are a lot of better fishing waters for them to be fishing in. So from a competitive standpoint, I think that we've done a nice job of going into a niche vertical where the people that can truly do that, they're not looking here because it just doesn't make enough sense financially for them to go and do that. Not to say that they could not do that, but from an opportunity standpoint, they look at it and say, no, that doesn't really make a lot of sense for us. And it's really important to understand when I talk about the technical ability of being able to do what it is we do. We've been very fortunate, in our industry. And again, I go back to ever since anybody learned to play a ChatGPT, everybody is an AI expert. I'll give you an example. There was an organization about a year and a half ago that basically said, "Oh yeah, we do data scientists." It's like, okay, well, what are your technical bona fides? You go onto LinkedIn and their lead data scientist has a marketing degree from Southern Utah University. I'm sorry, you are not a data scientist. Just because you type that online and say you are not a data scientist. That is a defined thing that requires a very specific background from an educational standpoint, training standpoint.
Shout out to Southern Utah University, Jack.
Well, yeah, exactly.
There goes that sponsorship.
Yeah. So,
hey, so Eli, what's the you mentioned in terms of from the addressable market point of view, right? So if you're given the cost of your guys' services, there's a certain threshold, right, where it doesn't make sense. Like if you're trying to buy 3 houses this year, 5 houses this year, they're not your target audience. What's the minimum transaction volume for wholesalers, flippers, that for people looking to buy properties, that where you see your what's the min on purchases per year where you guys see that's where our sweet spot is from a customer point of view?
Typically 50 deals and up. Part of it, what it comes down to is, and this may make me the most hated man in data, is there's this misnomer of motivated seller. Okay. When you think about true motivation, there's only a handful of scenarios where somebody's highly, highly motivated to, give their property away. Okay. And so with that, people are always looking for this magic bullet, this magic answer. And we don't sell magic here. I'm sorry. We don't do that. So with that, to be able to act upon the data, you have to be consistent within your marketing. But on top of that, the reason that I say 50 and up is there's a lot that goes into it from a systems and operations standpoint of, have you scaled your business to the point where you can actually take best-in-class data and make it actionable? One of the things that we do is that we can empirically prove how well our models work, because we're the only people in the industry that publish attribution, meaning, Craig, I generate a predictive data set for you in this market. After 1 quarter, I can show you how many deals came out of the data set. So it's not a question of, hey, does the data work? No, we publish the results. It really becomes a question of, okay, is the organization operationally efficient where they can actually act upon the data, engage it on a consistent basis, and then measure their performance. And
By the way,
why I harped, oh, go ahead, Jack.
yeah, by the way, I feel like that's an incredibly useful and interesting feature, right? Because like we're always investors are always sending mail into the ether, right? We have no idea. We get certain calls, we don't get other calls. We don't know why. We don't know what happened with those other calls. We don't know if we got all the deals in the market or none of the deals in the market. Like, are we any good at this? Like, and what you guys have is this, as you mentioned, this attribution module, which for the list that you sent out, they'll say, hey, here's the metro area that we used to cut your list. And then we sent you this list, and then you mailed it. And then here's all the deals that happened in that metro area. And of the deals that happened, this percent, here's the deals that were on your list, and here's the ones that we missed. So, the model will take those into consideration and further refine it and get better. It should get better each quarter, right? Because there's a constant feedback loop of the deals that are happening to make the algorithm better and better. The market changes over time, right? Like maybe it's a gentrifying area, so all of a sudden, like this particular neighborhood is selling to investors because everything's getting renovated over there. Mm-hmm. The algorithm doesn't know that, but the algorithm will take that into consideration, and you will see more deals in that neighborhood on your list the next quarter because that's where transactions are happening to investors. So anyway, so you actually do see, in the attribution, you'll see all the deals that happened, all the ones that were on your list, all the ones that weren't. And of the ones that were on your list, you'll see which ones you got and which ones everybody else got. And you'll see the name of the guy who beat you, right?
Wow.
Like you mailed that person, and then you go look into your CRM and say, all right, did we get a call from this person, right? Like, did they not like our piece, or was our piece not frequent? Like, is it something that, like, was it that we didn't get? You can then start to track within your system. And as long as, and to Eli's point, you have to have good systems set up to use this data properly, because otherwise you can't tell where along the way it broke, or like where along the way you didn't win. But if you do have your system set up, you can tell exactly that, because you'll be able to look into your CRM and say, did I get a call from this person? Did I get an appointment from this person? Did I attend an appointment for this person? Did I make an offer on this property? Was my offer accepted or not? And then you'll be able to, and then you'll be able to see, oh, look, I offered 120 and it sold to this other guy for 135. I got outbid. Wait, I made an offer on this property for 120 and it sold to this other guy for 105. Like, what the hell? Like, my sales guy's not doing follow-up. Like, he made a better offer and it sold somewhere else. And that happens all the freaking time.
Oh, absolutely.
And generally that is your like indicator of lack of follow-up, right? Like, the other guy just kept following up with him or was better at building rapport, right? That's a sales guy issue versus an appointment setting issue versus a piece issue, right? Versus the direct mail issue. And that attribution is super powerful because you're always getting that availability of data. And frankly, it's like great from a motivation point of view, because like most investors are competitive people, I imagine. And dude, it gets my blood up, right? When I see myself losing to these other folks, especially when they're like not all, if it's not just because they outbid me, they outbid me, fine, somebody chased the money and they closed, good for them. Did I offer the right price? Like maybe we underbid it, like you can't go in there and lowball, it's still a competitive market, so it helps you constantly refine your machine, to have this level of attribution. And so that's like I thought when you guys added that feature, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 years ago, 3-4 years ago, that was like a game changer from investors' ability to really get good at this thing and not just be sending mail into the ether and hope that your response rate's good and hope that your sales guy is talented enough, which is what a lot of guys are just operating off of, right? Just winging it.
Yeah, it allows the investor to ask a better question. Okay. by publishing the results and saying, okay, we got in front of this many deals. One of the things that I ask investors when we're doing a consult with them before they're a client, I'll just ask them a real simple question. I'll say, hey, in the last 90 days, how many properties did you market to that sold to a competitor that never contacted you? Do you know? And in the time I've been doing this, not a single person has been able to answer that question. And then generally what they'll respond with is, oh, well, we converted this. And I'm like, really? Well, how do you know that number is accurate? Because really if you think about what they're measuring, is it's just their in-house conversion. What came in that they're seeing? They're not actually measuring what happened against the market.
In the world.
And so,
right.
Yeah. And so
how
if
do you know that's
think
good?
about it,
like, oh yeah, you bought some houses. Is that good? Like,
Yeah, that'd be like if Jack and I were stockbrokers. Let's just say this last month, we got a 10% return. Jack and I are like, man, we're good. Yeah. We're good. But without knowing it, the market actually went up 30%. Yeah. All of a sudden, Jack and I, we're not so good.
It looks so good. Yeah.
Ignorance is bliss unless it's your own money. And so the point of the attribution is just, it helps you ask a better question because you can say, look, I got in front of, 1,200 opportunities in this quarter. How many of them actually did we engage with? Because then you start to understand, okay, well, that's how good my marketing is actually converting. But it also, it starts, if you think about it, there becomes a layer of accountability because if you know how many deals you actually got in front of with your marketing, irregardless of if marketing closed or not, your marketing guy can no longer come back to you and say, well, Craig, the list was no good. The list doesn't work. It's a bad list. It's like,
right.
Really? Right. Well, there's 1,200 opportunities here and only 2 people called us off that. Maybe you're not so good.
Yeah.
And then we look at the downstream effects of that. I think, people always say, well, where's the largest opportunity? And generally where I see a significant amount of loss is actually in the follow-up stages. So think about this, marketing did their job, right? They got the person in. But all of a sudden, this deal that you're still marketing to sold a month and a half ago, and it actually sold for less than what you offered happens all the time. So you start to see how much actually fell out at the acquisition stage. And then it allows the operator to go and
appointments from like 8 months ago. You'll see appointments from 8 months ago that all of a sudden transferred last month. And you're like, what the heck? And it's like, oh yeah, you look in the system and sales guy hasn't followed up in the past 4 months, right? He followed up for 90 days, right? He gave it the old college try and then he stopped and it transferred 4 months after that. And that's like a thing.
Happens all the time.
It's a thing in the industry. Yeah.
And you look at the notes and the acquisition guy's like, well, Tammy's crazy and has 17 cats and says she wants $1.2 million for a $98,000 house. It's like, okay, Tammy probably is crazy and does have 17 cats, but she also sold her property for $45,000, a month and a half ago to a competitor of yours. So let's get down. Yeah.
Also, it's great from like, you look at the competitors, you see the other active people in your market, and it also helps you to understand like how are they beating you, right? Like, all right, I got beat, but it helps you trace how you got beat, right? Like, did we get the appointment there? Is their marketing better than us? Or, in that they got the appointment and we didn't get the appointment. So like, maybe we need to be doing more on the outreach side. And then, markets are small, right? Like everyone knows like what their competitors are doing from like who's doing direct mail versus television versus texting versus cold calling, right? We're getting the damn texts ourselves. So you can start to see like which marketing mixes are if you've got one competitor who's just kicking your butt, just rip off what they're doing, right? And rebrand it yourself. Like don't just reinvent the wheel. Like just go do what they're doing to give yourself a shot. But without that, you're just like, I don't know, they're doing something over there. I don't know, but they're doing something. Eli, this really gives you the visibility.
Can you hang out with us for a second episode?
Yeah, certainly.
I'm sure there's a lot more stuff I want to dive into as well as Jack. It's been a great conversation thus far. I would encourage people to check out the next episode. We dive into some more stuff with Eli Fisher from Audantic. Thanks for joining us on this one. It's Craig Fuhr with Real Investor Radio. We'll catch you on the next episode.